Well, hey, good morning. It's middle of the week and a little cool, so we'll see what develops weather-wise. It's supposed to be wind advisory around here later this evening, and so we'll see. I'm getting used to the cold. Hope you are. Some of you probably are loving it, but I'm still kind of rebelling against the cold weather. So anyway, uh, life's good. We baseball yesterday, World Series, always kind of a classic thing. I'll look forward to that. I don't necessarily watch baseball all year, but when it comes to the series, I love doing that. And so Tammy and I sat down yesterday and kind of piddled around that and organizing life messages and things like that. But what a great night! And so here we are. Now we are in First Timothy. Flip the page, chapter 6. We're almost gone with the book, but we're going to jump into Second Timothy, and keep rocking and rolling. And today he shifts gear. So we looked at the aspect of widows, and then we looked at the aspect of leadership again, and now he's moving back into another area which Paul normally hits on these topics. And so this one now is going to be in the area of our work environment, what we do in that sense. And so let's just have that conversation. What's your attitude toward your boss? This is really what it is. When Paul spoke to the Colossian church and the Ephesian church, he spoke to masters and to slaves. Here in Ephesus, he speaks simply to what's considered the slaves. And we'll have a dialogue about that as we read through it. Let me read the text, and then we'll kind of just ask some questions and deal with it. He says, all who are under the yoke of slavery should consider their masters worthy of full respect, so that God's name and our teaching may not be slandered. Those who have believing masters should not show them disrespect just because they are fellow believers. Instead, they should serve them even better because their masters are dear to them as fellow believers and are devoted to the welfare of their slaves. So that's our context. That's what we're talking about. So let's talk about you for a minute. Those of you who are working, when you get to work, are you on time? Right? Are you an on-time person or are you a late person? At work, I have a lot of those guys that, man, they are barely hitting the clock in time to get to work. I've got those who get there early. I've got those who get here super early. And, so they're clock watchers, I guess, in that sense. And so, which are you, right? Are you diligent and focused, or are you a little more wasteful, right? You give a day's work for a day's wage. All of us would think we do, but really, how much of what you do really constitutes work? I'm told that when we think we're multitasking, we're only about 40% effective. So if you think about it and you consider yourself a multitasker, you're probably not as diligent of a worker as you would think you are, because that's why we need to learn how to stay in our lanes and not shift and all of those things. But anyway, these are another topics. I'm just kind of warming us up to the concept of work, because we live in a different society right now, don't we? A lot of us are working from home. A lot of us are self-employed, and so you've got those aspects. I have both. I am self-employed, then I also have a part-time deal which is the bulk of my week, and so there are those issues. And I have bosses, and I'm a boss, and so we have those things. So, are you at work? Are you task-oriented or relational-oriented? And how does all that mix, right? And so these are the things, because there's a lot of drama in your workplace, right? I mean, there's the the coffee, the break room, wherever you're in there, doing that, and there's the little pockets of conversation happening in hallways and over cubby holes and all of those things. And there's nothing wrong if you're in that kind of environment. If you're on an assembly line or whatever, it's a different deal. I've got guys that do a little bit of both. I've got office people that oversee managers, and I've got employees under that are, they're forklift drivers and they're fabricators, and they're, they pack out stone. I've got delivery guys. All of these things we've got that we deal with, and so it's kind of a hodgepodge there, and I'm creating a new culture really at the Stone Company these days. So I've got these 5 managers I've been pouring into 2 days a week. We spend a couple of hours or an hour, I guess, each day, each of the days looking at management and looking at what it means to be a good boss and what it means to be a good employee and all of those things. And so it's a crucial piece of life. And so Paul uses terms here, and I want to just kind of bring them into play. He uses the term slave, which is the term doulos. That is the term for slave. It would be the term for slavery in England. It would be the term for slavery here when it was in America. It's a slave. It's someone who is under compulsion, in a sense, to work. And so there are classes of slaves, and we're going to talk about that in a minute of how one became a slave. But basically, they fell into two kind of camps. There were what they called house servants. Those are the ones who managed the homes, they could have been bookkeepers. They kept inventory. Jesus, when he told parables about those, he would maybe call them stewards or whatever. They were those who were entrusted with certain aspects of the home, right? And so if you go back to the Old Testament, you would see the same thing. There were those who did the cooking, those who cared for the babies, those who did all of those things. And so you have that. Then you have some who worked in the fields. They tended to animals. Some that didn't do that were teachers. In Ephesus, you one of the slaves that you owned may have been the one who taught you children, and so there doesn't mean that they're not educated. It simply means that they have a servitude role in the church. I mean, in the house. Now, when he uses the term master, it's an interesting term. It's the word despot. Now, we see despot and we think of someone who's an evil ruler. That's by context, that's what that is. But the term despot really means one who has unrestricted authority, meaning that they can hire or fire, they can do whatever they want to. Some of the states around here, like Boston's in Alabama, we're a right-to-work state. I have the ability to fire someone for no reason. I don't need a reason to fire someone. You're done. Appreciate it. Have a good day. Now, I'm not that guy, but that is what we have here. So in that sense, I am kind of a despot manager because I can hire and fire at will. So this is the context of which we find ourselves. Now, let's transfer ourselves back to the 60s AD or so when Paul is writing this letter to Timothy so that we can kind of get it in the context. He is in the city of Ephesus, and there's slavery going on, and it's not looked down upon. It's not vicious slavery, though some is. And this is not an affirming of slavery. It's just to say that nowhere in the scriptures do you find where there is a push for rebelling against this. It is just the context of how it has been really as far back as Abraham. And so we're just having these. How did someone become a slave? Let's just kind of think through that. How did they become a slave? Well, they were either conquered, right? Daniel was a slave because Babylon defeated Israel and took all the young kids, Daniel being one of them, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego being the others, and there were more. So they just became servants because they were conquered people. So that's how some here in Ephesus would have been slaves. Some, and you see this even today in places like Haiti, where moms and dads can't afford to take care of their children, and so they sell their children as servants to other households so that their kids can eat and their kids can get an education and all of those things. Now, there's a lot of that is a destructive deal in Haiti today because there's a lot of sex trafficking and there's a lot of evil that has crept into that. But the parents just trying to get their kids to someplace because they can't physically feed them and care for them. They just want their kids to live. And that was true in those days as well. So there were some whose parents sold them into servitude in that sense. Some were inherited. If you owned slaves and they had kids and they continue to be your slave, well, those children grew up in that environment, and so you inherited those slaves. Or your parents had slaves and the parents passed away, then that would be what would take place. Then there's what they call indentured servants. Those are the servants who owed a debt. And in order to pay it off, they had to work for them. So we went to work for Guido to pay off the debt, right? And so that's kind of how that is. Now, in Jewish culture, and this isn't Jewish culture. They're in Ephesus. It's a Greek Roman culture, so it's different. But in Jewish culture, in the scriptures, you could be a slave for 6 years. The seventh year was a year of jubilee. You were free. Now you could sign back up to that, but whatever debt you owed was gone. You had the option to be free, but a lot of people grew accustomed to that environment and they enjoyed what was taking place. It's much like, and again, I am not condoning anything that happened in the South during with slavery and all that, but one of the issues that was surprising to those when they were emancipated, how many chose to stay on the plantation in that sense, because it was just all they knew. And it was comfortable for them, and so there are those types as well. So they're indentured servants, but yet when they've paid it off, they go, well, I want to sign up again. I like life here, and so it's hard for us to understand that, but that's the culture in which they work. Now, there then also were what they called day laborers. You remember that when Jesus told the story. Man's looking for hired help, and so he sets up a booth, and people come, and he agrees to a day's wage, and the guy gets here early and works all day, and then there's one that gets there 2 hours for quitting time, and he got the same rate. Remember, that created kind of some turmoil in that parable that Jesus told. And so there were day laborers, much like what you and I are. We're day laborers, right? We hired ourselves out. We enslave ourselves to go work for a certain amount of hours a day in order to receive a paycheck. And so that's kind of where we find ourselves. Now, let's talk about a few other things before we jump into this text. One is workers it's not meant to be where we derive our meaning in life. I think sometimes we've glorified that. You get men in a room together, and then one of the first things they're going to say is, what do you do, right? Not who are you, but what do you do? So we've allowed somehow work to give us our dignity and our meaning of life. But in the scriptures, that's never been. I mean, we have been gifted, right? There were those who built a temple, and there were those who served in the temple, and they were gifted craftsmen, or they were gifted musicians, or they were gifted issues like that. But those are, and some of you're gifted with your hands, you're gifted in sales, you're gifted in engineering and those things. So it's not that it's not a great part of who you are, but it's not meant to be define who we are, right? And in the Christian culture, it's not that way. What gives meaning to life is Christ in me. That's what gives my life meaning. That I am a vessel of honor, fit for the Master's service, and so I am a testimony of the grace of God. That's what I am. I'm also family. Is where I derive a lot of meaning. Because I'm a family man. I find meaning in my partnership with my wife, in my seeing my kids move along in life and get to good stations and good places. Work isn't what I do. That doesn't define me, right? Work doesn't. It's just what I do. It's not who I am. That's how I should say it. It's not what I do that defines me. It's who I am that defines me. And this is what Paul is driving at. And so this is where we get to the text this morning that we're going to look at. So work is an opportunity for several really, really good things, right? It gives us dignity. Paul said, listen, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. Work with your hands. What's he saying? Man, that's where you find dignity. Just there's something about work. If you read through the Proverbs, you read through Ecclesiastes, it's pro-work that you and me should toil. We should work. That doesn't always mean physical work, but that we should work. There's dignity in that. I derive dignity from work. We think less of people when they're not working, right? I'm not talking about those that are retired or those that are disabled. I just mean people who just aren't going to work. They're going to live from hand to mouth, and whatever they're doing. There's something dignified about knowing that I have a station in life and I'm creating something or a part of something that's productive. So there's that dignity. There's also provision, right? I mean, I like to eat. That's why I work, right? It provides provision for my household. It's a good thing, right? It lets me store up for the winter. It lets me do all of the things that Proverbs speaks of. And so we work in order to feed. In fact, the scripture says, if a man won't work, neither let him eat. This is Paul's instruction to some. And so there's that. There's the opportunity to do good works. If you and me which, and I believe, and I know you do too, that we're his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works that he prepared beforehand that we should do, then a part of that good work is going to be in the area environment of work, right? I bring a certain attitude. I bring good works to that area. I'm able to live the life of Christ. I'm able to demonstrate Christ. I'm able to model that. I'm able to demonstrate the morals and values of that. I give people dignity. I follow the golden rule. In fact, the two values that we are dealing with my managers right now at Tracery Stone, we have two values. We have the golden rule, which is if the tables were turned, how would we want to be treated? So that's how I treat my client. That's how I treat my internal client. In other words, in our company, things progress. So it moves from drafting to saws to fabrication and production, and then to delivery, and then to installation. We do all of those things. Well, if the drafting doesn't do their job, it affects how things are cut. And so they have a client, right? And so that's how we see it. And so the golden rule is a crucial piece of that. The second rule that we have is that we call it the second mile. Again, coming out of the scriptures, that when someone asks you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. So we go over and above. So we call that the golden second. And so I can ask my managers, did you do the golden second today? Did you do that in that environment? What did you do here? And that's the standard. See, that's a part, because I'm in that work environment, I get to set those values. And so I can do the good works that God's prepared for me to do. Not only that, but I can create an influence, right? I can influence people with the gospel of Christ because they see it. This is the benefits of work that sometimes goes unnoticed. It creates an opportunity for me to have relationships, and relationships are a good thing. In an abundance of counselors, there's wisdom. 2 are better than 1. All of those principles that flow out of the scriptures let me do that in that work environment. I love the guys and gals that I work with. One gal. We have all guys. I have 2 women that work in the company, of about 20-something guys. But anyway, I enjoy the relationships that I have there. And then it's a testimony sake, right? So these are the opportunities that happen in the workplace. It is our most ready and most powerful place to evangelize. I think the church is failing when we think that we should do evangelism through various activities. Not that there's anything wrong with the activities. Like right now, everybody's into the fall festival, and so they want to reach people for Christ during the fall festival. Nothing wrong with that at all. But our most readily available is that we would remind people that if you're a great employee, you become the greatest evangelist and missionary to the pockets where people live. That's the greatest way of doing it. And so we should see it that way. Now, what's my obligation to my boss? I said all of that to get to these 2 passages of scripture here. And this is what it is. What does he say? Well, there is an attitude toward all of my bosses. What is it? All who were under the yoke of slavery should consider, doesn't mean that they are, but should consider them, their masters, worthy of full respect. So listen, all my bosses and all of mine are professed believers. But assuming that they weren't, it wouldn't matter. I'm going to treat them with respect. That's my obligation. That's what Paul's saying. Hey, listen, where your boss is in the scheme of Christ and everything else is irrelevant. You consider them fully worthy of respect. And so you respect them. Man, you talk about grace. You talk about the gospel. When your boss is a tyrant and your boss is cold-hearted and he's just pouring it on you, and you always treat him with respect, it's doing a work in him that you can't see and Satan can't stop, and the gospel of Christ goes forth. So it's imperative that you and me are always respectful to our bosses. Why? So that God's name's not slandered. Look what he says. So that God's name and our teaching aren't slandered. You call yourself a Christian and you're disrespectful to your boss, you're slandering God's name and the teaching that the scriptures speak of, right? And so we have an obligation to walk into our place of employment. And no one deserves our respect. I'm not waiting on somebody to deserve my, well, I'll respect you if you respect me. No, that's anti-biblical. This is, I'm going to consider you worthy of all respect. And so it's powerful, right? Go into work today and see if that doesn't transform a lot of things over time that takes place. Then verse 2. He speaks of believing bosses. Those who are believing masters should not show them disrespect. Just because they're believers, you don't get to go, well, hey, I'm going to treat you, I'm just going to be nasty to you. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm just gonna tell you how I feel. I'm gonna tell you I don't like you. I'm gonna tell you all that. No, he says, don't do that. Those who are believing masters should not show them disrespect just because they're fellow believers. You should give them even greater respect. Instead, they should serve them even better because their masters are dear to them as fellow believers. You should actually be in love with the fact that that's your brother in Christ. And he says, knowing that y'all are partnering together to meet the needs of others, right? As fellow believers and are devoted to the welfare of the slaves. They become a partner to you to do what? To care for the least of these, to care for those, the employees below them are in partnership with you. And so this is how we should see work. And this is what Paul was determined that Timothy would teach. In fact, and I'll leave you with this phrase, it's the last half of verse 2. These are things you are to teach and insist on. This isn't up for debate. You show your unchristian boss full respect. And then you show your believing boss even greater respect for the reason, both of them for the reason of the gospel. One, so that your unsaved boss may see the gospel lived out, and for your believing boss that you may partner with and encourage him as you meet the needs of others. That's the message today. Man, Lord bless you guys. Love you. Can't wait to see you in the morning, Lord willing.